Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Hap here. You're somebody that has, really transformed this camping, outdoors, clothing, and really accessories industry. I mean, there was nothing like the North Face when what you did with it at the time, and you guys became the leader in the space and completely transformed it and built these high quality products that set the industry standard. And you took like military technology and put it into your products. I mean, you were so kind of outside the box with your thinking. So I'm excited to have you here and get into your story.
Well, thanks, Ben. It's great to be here. Hopefully, I can share a little bit of it that's maybe something that could be transported to others.
Awesome. That would be the goal. So, where did this kind of passion for entrepreneurship, technology, outdoors, like how did this begin initially?
Well, it was a combination of things and too lengthy to cover in one podcast, but the first one was I always spent time in the outdoors. I was raised in Spokane, Washington. That's what you did in your spare time. And so I had an understanding of what a good product was. I understand those things. And a number of life experiences I had also introduced me to a number of other aspects of life. One, I learned a lot about the quality of people making a big difference in a company. And I learned there were a lot of people that maybe didn't have the education even that I had at that time, but they were so clever at solving things. And I saw diversity as being important. And I saw, that women should be paid the same as men. I saw some women doing jobs better than men, but at that time, women were getting paid about 50% of what men were getting paid. And, so I had, this love of the outdoors, idiosyncratic views and everything. And my father died when I was in my senior year at Stanford. And so I ended up running a family company that was in wood products and windows and sash and door, flying back and forth and doing those things. And I concluded that we didn't have what it took to succeed. And we didn't have many of those things that I was looking for that I thought were really vital. A triple bottom line business being one, a quality product. We had a quality product, but, so I sold the company and while getting my Stanford MBA, and I was presuming that somebody would offer me the opportunity to run their company because here I have a Stanford MBA, I'd run a company, but that didn't show up, and so I started interviewing with other people with the belief that, like a lot of entrepreneurs would do, I'd do a side hustle, and I would do that while I was doing the job. I didn't feel good about that. I thought that was a little disingenuous. But
Hmm.
also, I think you can be really good if you're all in on something. You can be 120%. And if you're only 60% in on it and 40% on your own, are you really doing anybody a favor, yourself or the company? And are you really going to be standing out? But none of that uh, seemed overwhelmed the fact that nobody was offering me a job. So I had interviews with CPG companies, and I had one with Procter and Gamble that really determined that I was going to go elsewhere. And that, I felt bad about, as I said, this idea of doing a side hustle while you're doing a job and whatever. Cincinnati was, frankly, a pretty sleepy town. There's the old joke about if I'm going to die, I want to die in Cincinnati because everything happens 2 years later. I mean, here I'm coming out of Silicon Valley, even at that time, was fairly fast. And I'm flying back and forth to 900 miles to run a company when I'm in school, and and it seemed like it was slowing down a bit. And then none of the products they made were really these environmentally focused products. I mean, Procter and Gamble makes throwaway stuff that the more you throw it away, the better off they are. But and I went through an interview, and the interview was with the HR department, and they had 8-hour interview, an hour each with 8 different people. And the first one, he said, "Well, is your name Kenneth or is it Hap?" And I said, "Well, it could be either one, but most of my friends call me Hap." And he said, "Well, I see both in your CV, but when it's here, it'll be Kenneth because nicknames don't give you the gravitas to manage older people." And he said, "Of
Huh.
course, you realize you need to wear a white shirt and a tie." And that pissed me off because, I mean, I was wearing a white shirt and a tie, but there's no productivity analysis that proves that makes you more effective. And so I know I'm out of there. I know this is the wrong place to be. And then he asks the banal question that always comes up. They point at the sky as if they're communing with God. And they say, "Now, if you were to join our organization, where do you envision you would be in 5 years?" And knowing I'm out of there, I said, "Well, if if, and I'd like to understand, if I were to join Procter and Gamble, I would expect to be president in 5 years, and that means passing you in 5 minutes. So it doesn't mean any big deal. So a funny thing is, they offered me a job, but it was actually a great interview, and it was usually when you go into these job uh, situations, they always ask you, what do you want? And then you tell them what you want, you pour your heart out, and they say, well, that's great. That's exactly what we do here. And then you take the job, and osmotically over time, it dawns on you that a lot of that's not true. He didn't go through that ruse. He explained what it was. And I realized after that I didn't fit. I had too much hubris. I didn't see in these companies the idea of triple bottom line. I didn't see the commitment to the environment. I didn't see many of these things. And so, if you can't work for anybody else, what you need to do is start your own company. And I decided I'd start a company around something I knew, which was the out of doors, and put in what at that time were a lot of idiosyncratic ideas. The idea of a lifelong product with a lifelong warranty. Every financial person in the world said it was crazy, but I knew, having been in the outdoors, that if your product failed, your life depended on it. And I also knew that if you made a product that never went into, it never died, it never go into the landfill. And when you're going to the outdoors, that was what you did. And I'd done reading, uh, the Transcendentalist in particular. They talked about in wilderness is a preservation of the earth. I resonated with that. I wanted to make that the heart of what our company was, because we thought we were going to change the world. We had these ideas, which frankly, 40 years later have become kind of vogue. ESG, they call them now. But we believe that's what a company should do. And we thought if we could do that, we would change the world. And we could do it by sending people deep into the wilderness, and they would forget about the urban problems, which frankly were as bad then in the 60s as they are now out there. People would find that hard to believe, but we had the Vietnam War, we had the Black Panthers movement, we had a number of things going on, that free speech movement, all of that in the streets of Berkeley. The cop cars are going down the street with guns out the window. I mean, it was hairy time, but we knew if people went into the wilderness, they wouldn't think about those things, and they would actually think about taking care of the earth. They would do things in a proper way. And I felt that a company that had those principles as its DNA would build an iconic brand over a period of time. We didn't know how large it was going to be, but one that would stand on its own. May have been right, may have been wrong. A lot of people thought we were wrong. A lot of people were calling us, tree huggers and granola lovers and all those things. And people are telling me you can't have an omni-channel, which we did from day one. They're saying you can't have a lifetime warranty in a product, which we did from day one. But being an entrepreneur is about doing it in a different way. And frankly, the easiest way to build a brand is to be different. If you're just like everybody else, you got to spend a lot of money trying to explain why different isn't really
Huh.
different. Where if you are different, then all you need to do is spend a little bit of money so people learn about it.
Hmm. So how did the North Face begin? You have this idea. So did you just say, okay, I'm going to go create a product? You wound up buying the store, was an existing store, but
Yeah.
then you kind of introduced your own products, and they're like, how did you determine what were the best products to go and create and to build that out as a brand?
Well, after I left business school, I did a research project really on what the market was and what was out there and what was available. And what I realized is we were going to create a new product that was
Hmm.
going to be more expensive, even though it was cheap because it was byproducts of the military originally. Aircraft aluminum became tent poles and pack frames, and parachute cloth became sleeping bags and tents and funky clothing. But it was still going to be expensive compared to what existed out there. And what I knew from my studies and intuition was there's a product adoption cycle that's a bell-shaped curve, and you don't instantly go from start to stardom. You have to go through that period, and so what we believed was it was going to take us a while to set up manufacturing anyway. And it's laughable now what we thought manufacturing was, but it was going to take a while. It's going to take a while for people to adopt it. I mean, the person that helped me start the business, Jack Gilbert, made a sales tour up and down the west coast of the U.S., and he had one order for 14 sleeping bags.
Huh.
And however, what we believed and what I believed was we needed cash flow, because we didn't know how long the product adoption was going to be. We knew we were right, but we didn't know how long the product adoption was going to be. And it was all around equipment initially, sleeping bags and tents and packs, because that's what you needed to get you deep into the wilderness. So our, our belief was if we had a retail store that was generating some cash flow, then we could ride out the product adoption cycle, however long it took.
Mm.
And we sold some other products in the store, some which we later would sort of mimic as we were making it, and some of it was another category of goods. I mean, it was like climbing hardware, which we never made. And then what we did is set up manufacturing in the back half of the new store we put in. We had two, and then we added one, and the back half was manufacturing, and the front half was retail, partly because we could cover the cost of two things with it. The other one was it was pretty funky because the customers were right there. We were talking to them as we were making the product. And there's, today they talk about design thinking and all these things about being, really in touch with the customer. Nobody could have been more in touch with the customer than we were. People are sitting there watching you make the product that ultimately they were going to take.
So do you think it was just the product sold itself once you had it in the stores, people could see it, and then it was just word of mouth because it was such a high quality product? Like how did you scale it from your own stores to build this something that was all around the world and is a global brand?
Well, a long way from where we started with 14 people and being, what it is today, which is a $4 billion company, but or approximately in terms of turnover. But uh, the key thing was being able to prove what we could do. We were making
Mm.
functional gear, and a sleeping bag, you could prove what the temperature was going to be, the temperature range they're going to be covered. And we could, show in terms of lightweight a comparison of our gear to other gear that existed out there. So I wouldn't say it sold itself, but when you explained that to
Mm.
people and explained what you're doing, we didn't go into too great lengths trying to explain that, in wilderness is the preservation of the earth. We just said, we're like you. We'd like to go out there. If you do it, you'll have a good time.
Mm.
And so we sort of facilitated what was already existing there. The old adage is there's two ways to, start or to run a parade. One is to build one and step in front of it. The other one is to find one and step in front of it. And we knew that there was a back to the wilderness movement that was afoot anyway. We were part of it. We believed in it, but people were doing it to get away from the cities. And so if you can position yourself in the right place, then you're going to have a natural growth. Hard to forecast exactly how fast that is. It is, if you look at the product adoption cycle, if you accumulate that, it actually becomes an S. And the S is really what all industries follow, what companies follow. And, there's an inflection point where it takes off and grows dramatically. Up until that point, it's kind of slow growth. We knew we could ride that. We believed it was going to be out there. We believed we had our finger on the pulse of something that we loved, that a lot of other people loved, and really experienced something from it. And, we had a lot of strategies that we employed that we also believed were the wave of the future. The idea of
Mm.
environmentalism was something that was big for us. It was part of our triple bottom line. ESG, they call it now, or people, planet, and profits, all of those things. But we knew that was how you should run a business. And if you ran that business, we thought people would cling to us. You build a brand not around
Mm.
uh, a lot of advertising. You build a brand around your DNA, what you stand for. And if you can kind of consistently and persistently put that forward, it's like coral. It grows slowly. It changes rather imperceptibly, but it gets more complex, more rich, more beautiful until at some point it's unlike anything else. Well, our DNA was about disruption. We did it disruption, as I mentioned, with the products, using materials from the Vietnam War to make them lightweight. We were the first to use Gore-Tex for unique application. Our tent sales slowed down. I brought in Buckminster Fuller, who is a philosopher genius, who was the founder of geodesics and tensegrity and millions of other brilliant ideas. Had him mentor our team to be able to do that. Our business model was disruptive. We were omni-channel from day one. We had employee stock ownership plan. Everybody owned a piece of the rock, maybe tiny pieces, but everybody had something in there. It was disruptive from that standpoint. What we would do is try to take each of the key points, our 3 points being disruption, quality, and triple bottom line, and then we tried to find stories that we could tell
Mm.
to use word of mouth to spread the word beyond that. And of course, if I tell it to you, you say that's fine, but he's a homie. Obviously, he'd say it. You tell it to somebody, it sounds a little more credible. When the person you tell it to tells somebody, it's now almost become fact. And stories have been used forever as a way to convey something. And since we were talking about emphasizing really our qualitative aspects, stories were really beneficial to do it. The story around, the quality really had to do with the lifetime warranty that we dealt with. In terms of disruption, we started out initially talking about using materials from the Vietnam War. When it came to the triple bottom line, in terms of the environment, the story we came up with, because we got a lot of pushback, was really the idea of coming up with something that had a little bit of humor to it. So maybe people would not get quite so upset with us. And we created a negative award. And that award was called the Ice 9 Award. And Ice 9 was based on a book by Kurt Vonnegut, the American humorist, Cat's Cradle, in which the protagonist had this invention that was so brilliant, it was going to change all of the water in the world into ice. Of course, that would destroy the world, but he had to keep going because it's such a great idea. So, in Vonnegut's honor and the Cat's Cradle honor, we created the Ice 9 Award. And we each year would give it to the most environmentally destructive individual or organization in the world to be able to do that. Gave it to the U.S. Congress one year. And of course, I got all sorts of letters from congressmen's aides saying, you don't know what you're talking about. Yes, we do know what we're doing. But it was a way to to storytell about our commitment to the environment. We did it in a way that maybe people would embrace it or look at it in a new way. If they knew Vonnegut, they'd see we have a little sense of humor, and we're able to do that. But in terms of other things, I mean, we spoke 14 languages at all times in our factory, so we could hire the best of the best. It didn't matter where they came from. It also facilitated us growing internationally, because there's virtually no country we were going into that we weren't able to have one of our employees actually talk with them. And we hired LGBTQ, every letter you could imagine, and because we were just looking for the best employees. And byproduct of that, we became the go-to employer because people loved the practices that we had. So we had our pick of the best people that existed out there, and we would tell stories about that and how we would do that and how we'd build on that. And then the idea of developing, you have to have a team, of course. And 11 of the people that were with us at the early stages went on to actually run other major outdoor companies. One started Mountain Hardware, another one ran Birkenstock, another one ran Thule, one person ran Patagonia International. None of them came to the North Face with any business background, none. But what we were looking for, what I was looking for, was passion for the outdoors and a passion for changing the world. I figured you can't teach passion. You can teach business, and I'd had background in school. I had an MBA. I had a background running a family company. I knew something about that, and then I brought in lots of skilled people to be able to work with our team, people from business schools and others, so we could train them about business, and many of them took that and went forward. But there was that commitment to people, to the planet, to profits, and be able to go ahead.
Did you expect there to be such a strong demand for these products for lifestyle wear? I mean, there's a lot of technology in them. You guys designed them to be lifetime use for extreme situations in some cases, but people will use them as lifestyle products. Was that something that you were expecting?
We thought people would come to us, but to be honest, we didn't give a shit. we, we knew there were enough people in the segment we were selling to that even if those other people didn't come to us, we were going to have a great business. We might not have the biggest business, but we knew we would have a great business. We believed that the things that we were based on would become more mainstream, hence it would flow more into the mainstream. Now, seeing it as you see it now, I mean, it's still, they make sleeping bags and tents and packs, but that's probably only 15% of what they sell, the rest being clothing.
Right.
You can see
Right.
the where you go in the globe, and probably didn't expect that, uh, but we and $4 billion is something that was beyond our wildest imagination. I mean, that's what VF owns them now, and they're very skilled at running large companies and whatever. But we were thinking in terms of hundreds of millions as being an extraordinarily large company, and turns out that was just thinking small.
So when did you determine it was the right time that you did a lot at the North Face and it was time to go into something else? Like when did you determine that and how was it after you sold the company?
Well, the reason I did is that we basically had the wrong business model, and in that business model, in using the traditional sales that you had, which is sort of omni-channel and whatever, you can only grow 20% a year on internally generated funds. If you grow any more beyond that, either you have to bring in equity or debt, and you kind of alternate back and forth between them. But any of those fundraising done properly usually takes about 6 months a year, and we were growing 100% a year. So that meant, every year we were doing some form of refinancing. And that was not what I enjoyed at all. There's a whole bunch of negatives that, for me, I mean, my interest was in developing people, developing product, using the product, protecting the outdoors, using the company as a message. And then way down the line was the idea of being a poorly paid investment banker. And so that process, getting involved and, buying out some existing shareholders and bringing new shareholders in and all of that was the sort of politics that I really didn't enjoy. And I went through one fundraising, and it was, a lot of turmoil associated with it. And one of the board members, who was a good friend of mine, came up once, and he said to me, he said, "Okay, you accomplished it. Your ego is probably happy that you have this big fundraising that you brought in, but you've always said that when it wasn't fun any longer, that's when maybe you should move on. Have you really thought about moving on?" And that at first my ego was saying, no, I wouldn't. And then as I thought about it, the option of not having that hassle and not doing things, I'd sort of work myself out of the job that I loved. It was, I loved innovation. I loved disruption. I loved environment. I loved those things. And I wasn't loving what I was spending most of my time on, and the politics associated with fundraising. And so it, that was the time to go do something else. And I left that. I set up a consulting company. I've done some teaching at a couple of major universities, but the consulting was with small and large companies. But I got most fun with the entrepreneurs, because one, you make more of a difference with a small company you do with a large company. It was one where the experience I had was probably more valuable than a large company that maybe would prefer to bring in McKinsey or Accenture or people who are brilliant but don't necessarily deal with the nitty gritty of business as you know it.
Yeah. So, what would you say, like based on your experience, Hap, was like, the I would say like the kind of keys to selling a product. What was like the kind of best way to determine that a product was going to be a success versus not going to be a success?
Well, there's a lot of products in my closet that that I can show you make a success. I'm not sure we had the formula down perfectly, but I mean the first thing is that people don't buy products or services. What they buy is a vision. They buy what you stand for. And so you've got to create that vision around. And so you don't just sell them a sleeping bag, you sell them an opportunity to get into the wilderness. Or you don't sell them a ski garment because it's a color blue. You sell it to them so that they can be like the people doing extreme skiing or whatever. So one is creating a vision around that to be able to do it. I think that the second thing that we did, and I mentioned it earlier, is we were generally in a place where we could prove our product to somebody. If you want the best, and we often said it, if it was too expensive, that's okay. we know you'll come back to us at a certain point. And frankly, if it lasts a lifetime, divided up by the times you use it, it's really not as expensive as you might think. The all up cost on the way we develop it really would be less. And so we sort of used a proof point to be able to say it's worthwhile for you to be able to do that. And then the other one, of course, is just get in front of the parades that exist out there. And if you look at lifestyles right now and compare it to when I was growing up, the number of people who are working out, they're more fit, whether that working out is hiking or climbing or gym or biking or kayaking, any of those things, the numbers are dramatically higher now as people want to be more fit, more in tune with the wilderness. So we were part of that movement, and that's the way you sell. So we were selling, freedom. We were selling the ability to work out. We were selling all those things. And oh, by the way, you could do it with a sleeping bag from us, or our jacket happens to be a little bit lighter. So that's what we did, and we didn't worry so much about price, partly because I said we want to make the best. If people didn't have the amount of money necessary, we'll get them later on when they're really looking for the best.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions that I have. I appreciate you coming on. I think you have a really great story. You've done something that's been impactful to so many people's lives throughout the world. Like you said, you set in motion this trend of people now today focusing more on outdoors and taking care of their health. I mean, there's been brands just focused around certain subcategories of that, and you launched a brand around the entire category of it, which was the first of its kind. So I appreciate you coming on, and of course, I always wish you success with whatever you do going forward.
Well, thank you, Ben. It's probably easier than people think. You make a good product. You make a good product. You back it. You surround yourself with good people, and good things will happen to you. And it doesn't get more complex than that.